Phyllis Schlafly of Eagle Forum. She's a conservative political analyst and author of 20 books, a lawyer. And one of the books lately is the New York Times bestseller, No Higher Power, Obama's War on Religious Freedom. And we welcome Phyllis Schlafly this morning. Good morning, ma'am.
Well, hello, Fred and Jeremy. Good to join you.
Good to join you. Hey, listen, for some folks, they haven't heard too much about this. Why don't you explain a little bit about what Common Core is all about?
Well, it's amazing. It is the hottest issue at the grassroots of America. There's so many things the matter with Common Core. For starters, it's the federal takeover of the curriculum of education in elementary and high school. And they want to impose it. Most states have been bribed into adopting it because of federal money, and they want to dictate it. And the way the control is being exercised is through the tests. In other words, you've got to take the tests in order to get into college or get a high school diploma. And obviously, if you haven't studied what they want you to study, you're not going to be able to pass the test. So that's the first thing that people are upset about. You mentioned earlier you're going to school boards. That's not going to help you anymore because the school boards are read out of the picture. The school boards, state legislatures, parents, they don't have anything to say about what's being imposed on the children.
You know, you mentioned something that I think is at the crux of all of this is federal money. And I think school districts have been purchased. Their power has been given up in exchange for federal money, whether it's the school lunch program, which is billions of dollars handed out by the federal government, and let's remember, it's all taxpayers' money. It's our money that's going on here for food programs, school lunch programs at schools. And now they're giving more money to school districts who say they are, financially starved. And so, but in exchange for this money, they're selling their soul, Ms. Schlafly. That's what they seem to be doing. They're selling their soul to a federal government.
Now, there are 5 states that have said no thanks, Texas, Alaska, and I forget what the others are. So that is possible. But the federal government is proceeding with a carrot and stick operation. That is, you join up and you will get to be in on the race to the top money. And if you don't, we might even cut off your other money. And so parents are terribly upset about that. Then the next thing they're upset about is the compiling of a database of really nosy information on all children. And they will gather it into what they call a longitudinal database. That means they're going to enter information from birth all the way through to whenever you get a PhD or whatever. And that will be information that belongs to the government, and they can exchange it with other agencies. And, this, let me tell you, Fred, a few years ago I saw a picture in the New York Times of a warehouse in communist China. This is pre-internet, where they had thousands, even millions of manila folders with information on every school child. And they collected all this nosy information and all through the years, and then they turned it over to the employer after the kid left school. And they called it a dangan. And that's the mark of a totalitarian state. And we don't want that. And people are very upset about that aspect of Common Core.
Well, I think another aspect that has me frightened is the fact that now we're seeing the government pushing its propaganda into the reading list, such as a sales talk for Obamacare, global warming propaganda, such as pushing for Agenda 21. We're seeing people and heroes like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington being removed, and now they're adding Che Guevara and Fidel Castro, and also other things. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I think of things like the GLSEN recommended reading list that was being pushed by former Safe School czars Kevin Jennings as things that could come into these Common Core standards, and really it's just a progressive ideology that's seeping its way even further into our school children.
Well, you said that very well, and of course when I said the control mechanism is the test, you've got to study what they tell you to study in order to pass the test. and they have manipulated the readings in English. It's only the English and math standards that are so far out. When they get to the history and science, it's probably going to be worse. But at any rate, as you say, in the English readings, they have eliminated most of what we think of as the classics and what kids ought to be reading, and at least half of it is what they call informational reading instead of classical reading. That means how to run these mechanical things or computers and so forth. And that's what they want the children to be reading, which is not going to advance their education very, very much, and uses up time that should be used on getting understanding the breadth and scope of this wonderful America that we live in, and reading some of the great books of our time.
Well, it just seems like that we're trying to breed up a generation of factory workers instead of free thinkers.
You got it. Of course, that was the original John Dewey idea, that the purpose of public school education is to train the kids to obey what the government tells them, and that's what they want to do. And then there are the math standards that understand are so bad that the only mathematician on the commission refused to sign on to the results. It's a dumbing down too. And they are not going to make your Common Core is not going to make your kids smarter. The people who studied these standards say they're nowhere near as good as a number of our states. For example, the Massachusetts ones are pretty good because, you know, Massachusetts is a state that has all those elite colleges, and they have to have high school students who graduate and go to those colleges. And when they say Common Core will prepare you to be college ready, they are not talking about a standard 4-year college. They're talking only about a 2-year non-selective college. So it's a dumbing down, too. Everything's the matter with it. Have you got the idea yet, Fred?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. In case you just joined us, we're talking with Phyllis Schlafly of Eagle Forum, and you wrote an article on this, Common Core and the ensuing backlash, back a few weeks ago, Ms. Schlafly.
Yeah, it's on my website, eagleforum.org.
Super. And folks, you need to read this to get the full context of it. But, you know, we may have folks listening right now, Ms. Schlafly, that say, well, thank goodness my child goes to a charter school. Or my child goes to a religious school, and this doesn't affect them at all. But one of the points that you make in your article is that's not true. Common Core is going to affect even these schools.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. That's true. It is going to affect charter schools, religious schools, private schools, and even homeschoolers, because, as I mentioned earlier in the program, the control mechanism is the test. And if you haven't studied what you were supposed to study, you can't pass the test. And so that's the way they get all these private schools and homeschools. You may think they're learning great books and great education, great ideas, but that's not what they're going to be testing on. They're going to be testing on what they want you to know, and that's how they're going to control the other schools. So don't think you're safe if your kid's in some kind of private school.
Ms. Schlafly, you said that this is one of the hot-button issues right now for grassroots, but I'm just wondering, what is the position of teachers when it comes to these new standards?
Well, we're beginning to find a lot of teachers who don't like it and who realize it's bad. But this thing of it being so hot at the grassroots, these small groups of protest are rising up all over the country. There have been about 12 different local groups that have just appeared to fight Common Core in the state of Missouri. I live in Missouri, and I don't even know these people. They're coming out of the woodwork to say we don't like this. And this is happening all over the country. I'm hearing from members of Eagle Forum everywhere who've just discovered this and are very upset about it. And so a number of states now, in Indiana, we have a wonderful son of an Eagle Forum member who's a state senator, and he has realized that Indiana already signed on, but he got the legislature to pass a law that says they're going to have to pause and take another look at it. And so the state legislators, of course, are read out of the picture with Common Core, They're all done by these so-called experts. Every time I hear the word expert, I get suspicious. And we have a state senator in Missouri who's fighting this too. But it's tough when the state has already signed on. And but however, people are just, as I said, coming out of the woodwork because they don't want the Obama administration to take over what is taught and not taught in the schools.
You know, in this article that you've written on this, and we talked about this a moment ago about the texts, the books that are being suggested for this course. And if you take the money, I shouldn't say suggested, that these schools will have to read. And you make mention the suggested readings include a sales talk for government health care, such as Obamacare, global warming propaganda, and also another suggested reading favorably describes Fidel Castro and his associates without any indication they are tyrants, communists, and mass murderers. That's from your article. This is absolutely amazing. This is propaganda for the left.
Yes, that is. If they have the control of the content of what kids are learning and not learning, it's not going to be what parents want. And yes, they have a lot of propaganda in there. They call that informational reading instead of the great books. And I don't see any evidence that they're having readings that tell us about the founding of our country, the greatness of our founding fathers, the greatness and the exceptionalism of the American way. And I really urge you to have lots of programs about this because this is what the American people are really interested in. They really care. And then they really care even if your kid isn't in public school because they will all be affected when they control it by the test.
Well, Phyllis Schlafly of Eagle Forum, we want to appreciate and thank you for informing our audience of this. I think with everything else going on in the country right now, this all-important issue has kind of been put aside, but people need to be aware of it. This is our kids that we're talking about. And as I said, this is a propaganda program from the Obama administration and nothing less. And we thank you for taking the time to come and explain it to us this morning. Now, once again, where can they go to read this article and a little bit about Eagle Forum, and where can they find you on the Internet?
It's Eagle Forum, one word, eagleforum.org. And it's got my summary of what's wrong with Common Core on the website. That was last week's column, and this week's column is on what's wrong with the Gang of Eight bill on amnesty. So you can find a ton of wonderful, useful information about current issues, eagleforum.org.
Phyllis Schlafly, once again, thank you so much for being with us.
God bless.
God bless you. Take care. All right, we got to take another break here, but when we come back, we're going to go to our phones and get your comments on this. Were you aware of this Common Core? In your part of the country, there are some states that aren't buying into it, but you may live in an area that, wow, my kid is going to have to learn this stuff. I want to hear from you. 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840 is the number to call. You're listening to Dan Celia's Financial Issues with Fred and Jeremy. We're back in 3 minutes.